All right. Well, let's get started. Well, welcome everybody to our October Tug. My name is Chris Monahan. I'll be your MC today. We got a great event planned for you. Thank you all for tuning in today. It's hard to believe it's October. The rest of the year is almost done. But before we get started, as always, I just want to go ahead and thank all the wonderful folks that help put this event together every month. This is our Tug Advisory Council. All these folks work behind the scenes, meeting every other week to line up speakers, do the logistics, putting up the event pages, everything that goes into the event. So I just want to thank them for all their hard work. If you are interested in joining our advisory council and you have a knack for marketing or social media or just want to network in general, please reach out to one of us on the council and or myself, and we will get you set up on the team. So, as I mentioned, we got a great event planned today. I'm going to go over some general housekeeping announcements, and then we have our featured speaker today, who's Sarah Bartlett. She's a Tableau visionary, and she's going to give a presentation called "From Good to Great: Simple Design Considerations to Transform Your Dashboards." This is a great presentation. You definitely don't want to miss it. And then after that, we're going to have our networking breakout session, which is ask anyone anything about Tableau. If you have any burning questions about Tableau server, about training, about adoption, about desktop, bring it, and we would definitely try to answer them. So stay tuned after the presentation for that. As a reminder, the meeting format, this is a live meeting. So we encourage you all to turn on your cameras, say hello. I would turn on gallery view so that way you can see everybody else as well. But we do ask that you, of course, observe customary Zoom etiquette. We want this to be interactive, though, so please participate in the chat window. Put your comments there. If you have any questions for our speaker, you can DM Homer, and he will go ahead and collect those and save those to the end. And afterwards, we'll send out a survey too, because we always like to improve our events. So we'd love to get y'all's feedback. General housekeeping announcements. Our November Tug is right around the corner, and we are going to have our featured speaker there will be Jared Flores. Jared's a former member of our council back when we were larger with the DFW area as well. And he's a Tableau visionary as well. And he'll be doing from the warehouse to the data warehouse. He'll talk about his experience from where he worked to how he became a data analyst. And so that's a pretty cool presentation. And then, of course, we have our holiday event. This will be in person in downtown Austin. So if you're in the Austin area, join us at Lala's. It's going to be Thursday, December 7th, 5 to 7. We got free drinks there. It's going to be awesome. We'd love to see you come out and meet some of you guys. So please come and join that event. Just two quick Tableau announcements as well. It is Iron Viz month. So the 2024 Iron Viz qualifiers are now open. If you have a great dashboard design, please get your entry in by October 31st. This year's theme is love. So anything that you're passionate about, go ahead and create a dashboard around that. And it's pretty cool. I mean, not only do you get recognition, but there's also the opportunity to win up to $15,000 in prizes for yourself and also for a nonprofit. So it goes toward a good cause. So definitely check that out. And then there's also the Data Dev Day that's coming up on November 2nd. And that's going to be sort of a half day sort of event where if you're into development, more of a developer, you definitely want to check this out. There's going to be a lot of presentations and knowledge sharing, and you can see what other developers are doing with Tableau, some of the cool stuff they've done with prep and also some of the APIs. And it's a really great event. So that's going to be virtual. We'll go ahead and post that link to our Slack as well. So speaking of Slack, we have a Slack community. If you have not joined, you can join. In our chat there, I know Nicole has put a link so you can join our Slack community. That's where we post a lot of these announcements, just interact with folks and get some chatter and like to talk about different topics. So please join us in our community. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the good stuff. Again, we have our featured speaker, Sarah Bartlett, Tableau, 4-time Tableau visionary and 5-time Tableau public ambassador. She is the host of the Iron Quest community project and is the co-leader of the London Tug. So with that, Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the introduction. Let me just share my screen. If you can let me know when you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Brilliant. I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm working on a couple of different screens. So I want to make sure that I'm looking in the right place.
Sure.
But I'll turn it on again at the end. But thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from Austin, so I'm actually based in the UK. Um, so yeah, so as Chris mentioned, I'm a co-leader of the London Tableau user group. So I think we're the oldest and one of the biggest user groups in the world. So with first established, we have this debate with Atlanta that I think Atlanta ran a drinks like event in a pub. And they argue that that was the first ever Tableau user group, but we were the ones to have the first ones to ever have a meeting that wasn't in a pub. So that we have this ongoing like rivalry with them, and they're actually one of the biggest as well. But we're certainly the biggest outside of North America. And yes, as Chris mentioned, I'm a 4-time Tableau Visionary and 5-time ambassador, actually 6-time now since I wrote this presentation. So we just announced the ones for this year. So that's pretty exciting. Thank you. And I'm the founder of the IronQuest project. And if you're not familiar with IronQuest, it's based upon the format of IronViz. So like the feeders that Chris just mentioned that are on right now mimic the format of IronQuest. So what I tend to do is when we have IronViz, I don't run IronQuest, but I run an IronViz feedback initiative. So I'll share the links to that at the end. So if you are entering IronViz and you want to get some feedback on your visualization, by all means sign up to that. We have times to suit everyone, no matter where you are in the world. And I have about 25 volunteers from across the community helping out with that project. So it's really exciting. And it's, I think, out of the 6 finalists in the last 2 years, 5 of them took part in the initiative, and the last 3 champions took part in the initiative. So I think we must be doing something right since we're having such a great success rate. So I don't want to lose that streak. So please join us, enter and get through to the final. But I'm not going to be talking about that today. I'm going to be talking about how to create great dashboards and some simple tips that you can take forward and apply in your own work. There's nothing too technical here. Even if you're brand new to Tableau, there's no reason why you can't take these tips forward and start applying them right away. So let's just begin by thinking about some of the dashboards that you use on a regular basis, or maybe dashboards that you've created for other people. How do the people feel when they're using those dashboards? Do you even know how they feel when they're using dashboards perhaps that you created? Do they feel perhaps empowered, in control, or enlightened, which I hope they do? Or do they feel confused, frustrated, and overwhelmed? And I really hope that none of your users feel like the bottom right-hand emoji. But essentially, I think it's important that we check in with our users and ensure that they're getting what they need from our dashboards and they don't feel confused or frustrated when they use them. We really want people to get value out of the dashboards that we create. Not only does that lead to greater adoption, but it just means that people have a good experience when they use your dashboards. Now, in terms of like common dashboard design pitfalls, I think these are often to blame for any dashboards that might be overwhelming or confusing. And I'm going to cover some things today to overcome these issues. But just to go through these quickly, these are things that I've seen in my work and working in consulting, that often when users complain about dashboards, it's likely down to these 6 things. So the dashboards might have a confusing or inconsistent layout. So perhaps there's a series of dashboards in a workbook, and each one's completely different. So every time they go in, they have to kind of reorientate themselves and figure out how to use each dashboard. Or it may be that it's just not laid out in a logical way, which makes it difficult for the users to comprehend. There may be ineffective chart choices. So where perhaps a bar chart could have been best, they might have used a pie chart. And that might just make that information harder to process and harder to get those insights that the users really need. There may be an unintentional use of color. So when the person put the dashboard together, they may have just, colored everything because it looked nice without any real thought about what those colors meant. Or perhaps there was colors that were used multiple times to mean different things. So where people saw the color blue, for instance, they associated blue with, let's say, a region, but then that blue was then used somewhere else on the dashboard to mean a type of product, for instance, which led to confusion. There may have been a lack of white space. So I think we've all seen dashboards where people have tried to cram in as much as they possibly can, leaving no room to breathe, essentially. So it really leads to this kind of cognitive overload where your brain's trying to process so much on the screen that it can be quite difficult. And that's often down to the lack of white space. there could be an unnecessary noise and clutter. So perhaps people have left on grid lines and they've labeled everything. They've added in just visual elements just to fill that white space, leading to lots of clutter, making it difficult to comprehend again. And then finally, there may be some usability issues. So that could be down to maybe accessibility. So you may have people perhaps that are colorblind and they can't comprehend the colors as they were intended on the screen. Or there may be some navigation issues. So I've used dashboards before that have buttons, just like the ones I have at the top of this screen, where you click through the buttons and then all of a sudden you get to the end and there's no way to get back. Or get back home. So there could be issues like that again have an impact on usability and just really the experience of using those dashboards. So when I was going through preparing this presentation, what I wanted was a dashboard that I could make over and then apply some best practices to. And so to find the dashboard like that, I went over to the Tableau Exchange, where you can find Tableau Accelerator dashboards. So these Accelerator dashboards are either provided by Tableau themselves or by Tableau partners.
Sarah, I'm sorry
Yes.
to interrupt, but are we supposed to be seeing slides moving?
Yeah.
Okay. We're all still seeing maximizing your data potential.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Let's see. Let me just stop sharing and I'll start sharing again.
Thanks, Nicole. I thought it was a long intro, and then we were getting
Sorry.
no,
No.
I was about to ask the same. Yeah.
Let me just try again. Hang on. I'm glad you said something. Otherwise, we would have had the whole presentation like that. Okay.
I needed to confirm with the others in chat before I said it was just me.
Right. Hopefully you can see my
Oh yes, it's moving.
right. So I've been through about 5 slides. So that was my intro. And then we had the how do people feel? So this is when I was talking about the emojis.
Yes.
And then there was a pitfall. So sorry about that. This presentation is available on my Tableau public page. So you can go back and download it and have a look at it later. But yeah, so back to the Tableau Exchange. So I'm not sure if anyone's used this, but if you haven't, you can scan the QR code and that will take you over to the Exchange. It's completely free to use. But on the Tableau Exchange, there's accelerator dashboards. So these are sample dashboards that you can download and actually use for your own work. Now, they're split into different categories. Some of them will be by industry, or some of them might be by use case. So perhaps you need to put together a sales dashboard. They'll have examples of those dashboards on here. And I find that these are really useful, even if you're not in the industries that they're designed for, just getting an idea of best practices or what's possible. So I often recommend people to go over here and have a look at the dashboards on the Exchange. Now, they are uploaded by either partners or Tableau themselves. To be honest, the ones loaded by the partners tend to be a little bit better than the ones uploaded by Tableau. The ones added by Tableau, for the most part, they date back a couple of years. Tableau bought a company called Limpack, and a lot of them were designed by Limpack, at least some of the older ones. And they're not the best designs, should I say, to put it nicely. And they're if you look at Tableau Public, a lot of the time, Tableau visionaries and Tableau ambassadors will make over these dashboards just as a little design challenge. And they often pick the Limpack ones to do that with, because there's some design kind of principles with them that could be improved. So I wanted to do that. So I had a look around on the Exchange and I found a dashboard that was related to rooms revenue. So it was looking at a fictional kind of hotel company and the revenue they were bringing in from the rooms that they were selling at different hotels around the world. Now, the subject matter for this dashboard is kind of irrelevant. It was really more the design that I wanted to look at and look for ways that it could be improved. The great thing about the Exchange is it does give you a good overview of these dashboards, the metrics they include, a description of those metrics. So it is really, really useful in that sense. And it also gives you a breakdown of the key business questions that the dashboards are designed to answer, which I think is really, really helpful. And it's something that's good practice, when you're putting together a dashboard, is to think about the questions you're trying to answer with the data. And so that was really good to see. So this is the dashboard that I decided to make over. So in the dashboards designed by Limpack, you'll be able to identify them because they all kind of look like this. They each have about maybe 3 or 4 dashboards in the workbook. Each one starts off with an executive summary and then some more detailed views on the different subject matter, depending on what the dashboard's on. So for this makeover, I just decided to focus on the executive summary alone and make over this page. So in terms of the things that I like about this dashboard is I like that it's got what we call bands, so big angry numbers, so there's big KPIs, and the bands are shown with trends, so that helps to put them into context. So you see for each one there's a chart, whether that be a line chart or a bar chart, but it gives you a sense of this is the number today and this is how it's performed, let's say over the last 12 months. So it's giving context to that number, which is really important, because if I take the $0.3 million kind of total rooms revenue, for example, without that context, I don't know if that's good or bad, right? The use of color, it's pretty good. So we can see that I believe the color has been used intentionally. There's limited use of color, so it's mainly different shades of blue. And I can see that they're using blue to kind of highlight areas where we have higher values, or so a darker blue for those higher values and a lighter blue for those lower values, which kind of makes sense to me. And there's also consistent spacing between the different elements. So this dashboard is split into, I'd say, about 4 different areas. And each of those areas has some padding around it. So and that padding is consistent. And that's something that I like to see. It just helps with that visual kind of design, making it look nice kind of concept. So that was really good to see. Now, in terms of things that I don't like or could be improved, it's a couple of things. So the first thing would be the layout. So for me, this layout is a little bit inconsistent and cluttered. So we have these 4 different sections, and they're kind of all different. They're laid out differently. There doesn't really seem to be any, for me, any like true like consistency between them. I'd like to see something more consistent personally with this. And I mentioned the colors before, and I said I like the colors, but as I looked into this dashboard more, I got a little bit confused about what the colors actually meant, because the theory that I had was that the dark blue was the higher values and the light blue was the lower values, but that wasn't always the case. If you actually go into the data, there is some inconsistency there as well. I also felt like there's some duplication in the information being shown. So here we're looking at the total rooms revenue. I think for the different properties, but that information is shown in multiple places on the dashboard. So it's almost like there's duplication of that information. So I'd rather use that space to show something more valuable than the same information maybe shown in a different way. The maps were the big issue for me. Like looking at, so if I imagine this is a company, they have hotels around the world, they probably know where those hotels are located, and the maps don't really add too much value other than showing us where those hotels are. And then we have a square that's used to indicate either the amount of revenue that they generate or the occupancy rate. But it's very difficult to determine the difference in size between those squares. There's no labels on those squares. They're using size and color to as visual attributes of those marks. But it's very, if I ask you to compare, the size of the square in, I think it's in Europe somewhere, and the size of the square in, I think looks like the Northwest, that US, it would be difficult to give a real indication of the value of those actual numbers. So for me, I question, do we actually need these maps, or is there a better way of showing this information? And then finally, we have some filters at the top that are taking up quite a bit of space. It looks like they've allocated a big white space at the top for those filters. And I thought perhaps there's a better way of doing that. And then finally, accessibility. With the colors, I had some concerns about the accessibility, and also that the fact that on this dashboard, they've designed it in such a way that the labels inherit the color of the mark. So you can see where we've got a blue bar, we have a blue label. And that's okay for the darker colors, but where we have this light blue, that does make that text quite difficult to read it. And I think if we put this through a color contrast checker, we'd see that those labels would fail with the contrast against the white background. So I had some concerns there. So with all that in mind, I decided to come up with my own design, which is this. So the reason I went with this kind of approach is I wanted something that was very consistent, that broke down this information in the same way. So we have 4 sections here. Each of them they're all displayed in exactly the same fashion, but I wanted it to be designed in such a way that you could look at this dashboard and just glance and get the key insights straight away. I use color to highlight areas of underperformance on the bars, so you can see instantly, or your eyes should be drawn to the areas where we're underperforming. And then we have the bands at the top along with a spark line. So again, we can see those big numbers and a trend. And I've also indicated with the kind of the arrows to show if that number is up or down versus the prior year. You'll see also I've used a filter. I think this is interactive. Yeah, so I've used a show hide container for the filters. So just so we can maximize the space on the dashboard, so we haven't got that big area of kind of filters. We've got this behind a button. And I just had a think about, how we could show this information. What I decided to do was actually bring in brand and then show those properties broken down by their brand. We don't have the information that we had in the map, but if we hover over the tooltip, we'll see the location of that property and some additional information about them as well. So that was my approach. And I'm going to talk through a couple of the things that I did and the reasons why I did them in the next section. So in terms of layout, when we're designing dashboards, it's really important that we think about the layout of the items on the screen. And what I like to apply is this like Z-like pattern. So with this approach, we put the most important information at the top. So that's probably the highest level information you're going to show, typically KPIs, so aggregated numbers. And then as we go down the dashboard, we put in some more detailed information. And the reason we do this is because in the Western world, at least, your eyes will typically move from left to right, then down, and then left to right again. And there's been some eye tracking research done by Tableau that actually proves this point. The only time that it perhaps doesn't apply is if you maybe had a really big red button in the bottom right, or something to draw people's eyes in. There was some interesting research done by Tableau where they showed a dashboard, and it was about I think injuries to like the human body, and they had a kind of a dummy on there that looked a little bit like a naked body. And with that dashboard, that dummy was somewhere in the middle, and people's eyes were drawn straight there. So not to the top left, they were drawn straight to this body, thinking it was a naked body. When they realized it wasn't, their eyes would then go back to the top left. But I thought that was quite funny to see how we could manipulate the way that people look at dashboards. But all that aside, if on a standard dashboard, users will typically look at the top left corner first. So we can maximize our the effectiveness of our dashboards by applying this Z-like approach to our design. So hence why in my design, I've taken the approach of putting those KPIs at the top. Now, if we go to the original dashboard, that approach does not apply. I guess you could say that they applied the Z-like pattern perhaps in each section, but certainly from a dashboard perspective, you're having to process each section separately, and each section is laid out slightly differently as well. So I wanted that consistency with mine, hence why I took that approach of putting the KPIs along the top and the more detailed information down below. The next thing I wanted to consider was chart choices. So it's really important that we try and pick the best charts for the information we're trying to convey. Now, I appreciate this can be difficult. There's a lot of charts that we could pick, and sometimes, we might have a tendency to try and pick something that's a little bit more creative. So rather than perhaps using a bar chart, which often is the best choice, people might decide, hey, I'm going to use a Sankey, or I'm going to use a radial to make it look really cool and draw people's attention in. But unfortunately, that comes at a cost in most cases, that those charts are less effective at what they're trying to achieve. Now, if you do struggle with choosing charts, choosing which charts are best for the information you want to show, there are some great resources out there. So my favorite is the visual vocabulary. So the visual vocabulary was originally put together by the Financial Times, and that it's almost like a big poster. And I've got this diverging bar kind of example taken from the visual vocabulary here. So it shows you, if you want to show variance, for instance, it will show the types of charts that might be good for showing that type of information. But it's really easy to read, and it will give you various different chart choices for each kind of challenge that you want to show. Now, Andy Kriebel, who's a Hall of Fame Tableau visionary, I'm sure many of you are familiar with his work. He does a lot of videos on YouTube and writes a lot of blogs on bizwiz.com. he actually took that visual vocabulary and rebuilt it in Tableau. You can get this on Tableau Public, and I have a link to it at the end of this workbook. But it's really helpful in showing what's possible with Tableau in terms of the charts you can build, whilst applying that kind of logic from the visual vocabulary. So again, if you want to show, let's say, divergence, you can have a look in there and see the types of charts you should use for that challenge. So that's, if I'm struggling, that tends to be the resource that I go to, and just to reference what's possible. Now, with the challenge with this dashboard was the maps. So for me, I think the maps were the big one where I thought, that's probably not the best chart choice. And for those wondering, maps are a chart, especially in Tableau, they are a type of chart. But for me, the maps certainly weren't a good use of well, they weren't the best chart to show that information. And also, there was some, I thought it was strange that on this dashboard we have some where we're showing trends over time. Some of them are shown as area charts, and some of them are shown as bar charts. And I really wanted some consistency in how that information was shown. So I appreciate it being there, but I would have liked to see more consistency with that. So in my new design, as you can see, I took away the maps. I didn't think it was the best way of showing that information. I included the information in other ways, so you can filter by country, you can hover over the tooltip and see the country that those properties belong to. But I didn't think adding the map, added too much value. So the other thing I want to think about is color. So it's really important that we use color purposefully when we're putting together dashboards. And I know that it can be very easy just to, just throw colors on without much thought and thinking that they look nice. But picking colors is difficult, and it's something that I've failed at time and time again, and I've had to learn with more practice. And again, there are resources out there that can help you. If you're, sometimes we have to abide by corporate color palettes, which can be good and bad. Some of those palettes are designed by people that don't understand data visualization, so sometimes it makes it very difficult to apply those colors. You might have a corporate color palette with just 3 colors, and you typically need more colors than that for data viz. Or you might have the flexibility of creating your own color palettes. And if that's the case, there are resources out there that can help you. There's a website called coolers.co that I like to use, which helps you to put together just visually appealing color palettes, and they can be applied to data visualization. And I've used that site quite a lot. And it also has some built-in accessibility features in there, so it shows you that kind of what colors will work together if you're creating color palettes that need to be accessible. But wherever you're putting together a dashboard, think about accessibility, and I'm going to go on to that in more detail in a minute. But also think about, do you need to color everything, or can you use color in a more strategic way to draw attention in? So on the dashboard that I've designed, I try to use minimal color and just use color where I want to draw attention. So as I said at the beginning, I use that blue purely to show areas of underperformance. I didn't feel the need to color the areas of overperformance, because typically in this case, I imagine they've met their target, therefore we're happy. It's really the areas of underperformance that I want people to focus on. And with this dashboard, I imagine people would go in, look at those areas that were underperforming, and then take action on those areas. So hence why I colored everything else in a muted gray. So the information's there, but your eyes typically wouldn't be drawn to it immediately. I also used minimal color on the arrows at the top, just to show areas of how you're performing on versus the prior year. I used, thinking about accessibility for a second, I use double encoding here. So I'm not only am I showing a triangle pointing either up or down, these are all pointing up because we're up prior year on all of these metrics. But if we were down, it would be an arrow pointing down. But I also colored that arrow to show if it was up, it was green. If it was down, it would have been red. Now, that's helpful because if somebody struggled with color blindness and perhaps maybe couldn't comprehend the colors as they were supposed to be shown, at least they can still see the direction of the arrow. So regardless of the color, they can understand what those arrows are showing. Okay. Let's move on. So next thing I want to talk about is white space. So I think it's really important that we apply white space in our dashboards to give that just to give that, make the dashboard more readable, and just to make sure it's not overwhelming when we look at it. I know many a times I've looked at dashboards and then instantly have been like, oh gosh, there's a lot here to take in. There's not much room for the different elements to breathe. So for that reason, white space is really important. And I know it's sometimes we have a tendency to try and fill any white space. We don't like to leave white space. It can make us feel quite uncomfortable sometimes if there is a lot of white space on anything that we're designing. But it is really good from a design perspective. Now with Tableau, there's a setting in the layout pane called padding. So we can apply padding, either inner or outer padding, to any elements on our dashboard. So we can apply them around charts, and we can apply them around containers. And I've used padding. I think it's probably been in Tableau for a couple of years now, because prior to this, I know people would drag in like blank containers and use those for padding instead. But we now have this feature that allows you to add and customize padding around the 4 edges of any element. Now, if we add inner padding, that adds more space around the chart in the worksheet, so the inside. Or if we add outer padding, that adds more space around the entire worksheet, so from the outside. So I encourage you to look at this, experiment, and see how you can apply padding in any dashboards that you have, just to add that additional white space. Tableau make it really easy with this setting. You can kind of set the same padding all the way around the edges, or you can customize it so that each one is different. Now, whenever I'm putting together dashboards, let's show you mine. I try and be very particular about the padding, so you can see that around each of these elements, I'm using exactly the same kind of padding, both on the inside and the outside, and around each of the containers as well. So you can see that there's the same distance between each of these elements. And I find that's something that I really try and nail every time, because I think that helps with just bringing together those nice designs. Another thing I like to do is add padding all the way around the edge. So you can see that I've got this border all the way around the edge of my dashboard, just to give this whole dashboard more room to breathe. Sometimes you might see dashboards where things have been put right on the very edge. So maybe the title's right on the very, very border of the page. But just bringing it in just gives that additional white space and room to breathe. And it's always best practice to try and keep any additional text out of those kind of gutters or borders. So you can see here I've got some text down below, but I've still got some space below it, just to give that additional room to breathe. So do experiment with padding and see how you get on with it. Another thing I want to talk about is clutter. So it goes kind of hand in hand with that previous comment about white space. But when we're designing dashboards, it can be really useful. And I know this stems from I'm going to forget his name, but one of the kind of data visualization, like visionaries, the original ones, was around, they spoke about like the data to ink ratio, and how, look at your dashboard and assess what's on it, and to try and decide if there's anything you can take away without taking away anything that's important or that's for interpreting the information. So an easy way to do this is have a look at things like borders, grid lines, axes, and labels, and just consider, like, do I actually need these? Are they adding any value to my user, or can they be taken away and that information will still be comprehensible? Often, particularly on dark background visualizations, if we add grid lines using the custom settings that Tableau provide, you get these really stark white lines, and they can be really overwhelming to look at. So grid lines are often, an area where we can take them away and still give that context that we need to provide. Labels can also, sometimes people feel the tendency to label everything, and that can lead to that additional clutter that we don't need. On this dashboard, I found that that everything's labeled, which can be good for accessibility, but also, for me, it adds that additional clutter. For the most part, though, I think this, labels aside, this dashboard is pretty clean. We don't really have any grid lines. Everything is kind of here that it serves a purpose. So that was really good to see. Now with my design, the way I applied the labels was for every brand, I labeled the highest and lowest bars. But if you need the information for any particular bar, you can hover over it and get that additional context. But I thought it was important just to, just label where we need to, but not label everything. And then finally, I just want to talk about accessibility quickly. So it's really important that we consider accessibility when we're designing our dashboards. 10%, I think it's around 10% of the male population do suffer from color blindness, and often we may not know what accessibility considerations our users have, so they may not mention that they have these, so we have to consider that somebody in our audience may have some kind of disability or impairment that means that they need to consume dashboards differently. So whenever we're design with accessibility in mind, one of the things that we can do, I mentioned before, is around not relying on color alone to convey information. So instead of just using colors, we can also use shapes and labels to show that information. And we call that double encoding. So that could be, an example would be showing a bar and then showing a label as well. So if you can't interpret the color of the bar, at least you can see the value on the label. Provide instructions for how the user is supposed to interact with the dashboard. So many times I see dashboards where we just kind of put them out with no instructions on how they're supposed to be used. So if, for instance, you expect people to hover over a bar to get some information, just write a short sentence to say hover over the bars for additional info. And I think I've done that on this dashboard. Yeah, so just a little line here just to say how people are supposed to interact with the dashboard. And those kind of little helper kind of instructions go a long way, because I know as a dashboard user myself, whenever I see that, it's quite comforting to know that there's that additional information there to help people. If you are struggling with accessibility or not sure, how to approach it or how to interpret if your dashboard is accessible, there are some tools out there that can help you. And if I haven't got them linked at the below, I'll send you some resources at the end, which you can refer to. But there is, what's it called? The name escapes me. There's something I can share with you that where you can use. Chartability. So there is a resource called Chartability that goes into a lot of detail around accessibility and how it applies to data visualization. I'll send a link at the end. It is a really important area, and there's people like Emily Kund do a lot of work in this area around putting information out on how we can make our dashboards more accessible. And so I think that was my last point. So in summary, when you're designing dashboards, try and use a logical layout. Evaluate your chart choices, and you can use resources like the visual vocabulary to help you do this. Try and use colors purposefully. Don't just splash color everywhere and hope that it looks nice. Apply white space, eliminate noise and clutter, and then consider accessibility in your design. Now, I do have some credit. So I want to thank Chimdi. He was the person that inspired me to put together this presentation. So some of this information came from him. The visual vocabularies I've included in here, so both the original from the Financial Times and also the Tableau version by Andy Kriebel. And I have a link through to the Exchange Tableau Accelerator that I used for this dashboard, if you want to take a look at that as well, or any of the other ones on there. But thank you, and I hope you found this presentation useful.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. That was super interesting. I really liked all the tips you had in there. I think what we'll do right now is we'll open up the floor to any questions. Homer, I don't know, are there any questions that people have?
Let me say, I got one new message. That's not a question. It's just saying that was a great presentation. Thank you, from Pamela.
Thank you.
I had a question about, you mentioned level of detail in passing, but could you maybe embellish a little bit more your views about using it and how effective it is to put more deeper down that people have to drill into versus keeping more up top?
Yeah, so let me bring up this dashboard to help me. So, I mean, obviously it's going to depend on your audience and what action you expect them to take. That's the underlying question I always try and ask, is what action are you going to take with this dashboard? So often people will say, hey, I want a dashboard, and they're not really sure why they want it or what they're going to do with it once they get it, right? It's just because they just want it because it will make them feel more comfortable. So I think you need to really get into that point around what action they need to take. Now, this is a fictional example, but let's assume that this dashboard is used by people like regional managers that manage these hotels, and they want to understand where their best or worst performing properties are. So for this dashboard, I thought it was important to have that summary information at the top and then more detailed information down below, so I can see let's take rooms revenue, for example, that it's performing pretty well overall. But as I drill in, I can see that there's some properties that aren't performing as well versus the previous year and perhaps need some attention. So the approach that I like to take is like this, because it means if those metrics are performing well and I've got nothing to worry about, then I don't need to drill in. But at least if it's not performing so well, I have that additional information there that I can drill into and then take the necessary action with. Now, in some cases, it might not make sense to put that all on one dashboard. I know I've designed dashboards in the past where we have a summary information and that more detailed information is in a different view. And that can help, particularly if you're designing for different personas. Because I find, maybe senior managers don't need that level of detail, right? They just want to care about the high level metrics and they don't want to see a table of information. But where you've got perhaps analysts that are using this that do need that information, or maybe lower level managers, they do need that detail. So having those different views can be helpful, so not to overwhelm those senior execs, but also give the information to the people that need it, that need to take that granular kind of level action.
Okay, super. I have a follow-up question, but I'm going to first take a question from our audience, which is, when you're coming up with the final design for the dashboard, do you draw or sketch the dashboard beforehand, like in developing a website, for instance? This might be referred to as a wireframe. Do you take that approach, get some feedback from the users, and then go from there, so you're not presenting a final iteration that may have steered off the mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely I start off by doing something by hand, even if I'm doing this with a virtual audience, you can still like take a picture of it, or if I'm not as skilled as some people like to draw it on the screen, but I try and do it by hand and then maybe just share it that way. But I definitely take that approach, simply because I think when we build things in Tableau, we can get easily attached to them and we don't like to throw them away. Even if someone says, I don't want that anymore, if you've put time and you invested your time into building something, it can be quite painful to then delete it and start again. But if you're doing it on paper, it's really easy, right? So I think it's really important that you get that wireframe nailed. I also use a tool called Figma. So, but you can do this in PowerPoint or really anything you feel comfortable with, where I can take that paper wireframe and then build out something a little bit more robust in a tool like Figma. And the benefit of Figma is you can actually build something that pretty much looks and feels like Tableau, and you can actually add in those interactions. So perhaps let's say for the filters, I could mimic this click. So where people click up here, they see the filter appear. And I've actually done this with users, and they actually thought they were in Tableau for a second, because those interactions are in there. But the benefit of doing something like that is you could actually test out that user journey and those interactions and make sure that it all makes sense. And you can test it with users to make sure that they understand it and it's intuitive enough that they know where to click as well.
Homer, I sort of had a follow-up question to that. I
Sure,
guess,
you go ahead, and then I will.
Yeah. So is that is the process that you do to do the design or the wireframe, are you following the same steps that you showed here? Like you start with layout and then you do like maybe chart selection next, and like what is it the same order that you did here, or like
No, so not always. No. So when I'm doing the wireframes, I tend to use, I think in the US you call them like sticky notes. I call them post-it notes. Like I have them here, that these things, right? So I tend to use these. So I'll use one for each chart. So I'll draw the charts on those stickies, and then you can kind of move them around like puzzle pieces on the page. And you can throw them away, if you don't need them. And then I'll come up with my layout based upon kind of what I think makes the most sense around where they should sit. So I tend to use that process. And I actually got that idea from Cole Nussbaum-Knaflic. So she's the author of Storytelling with Data. She also has like storytellingwithdata.com. And it's something that she does in her workshops. And it's something I've used for the last couple of years since she kind of introduced that to me, because it's so much easier to do it that way than drawing things on a page and then having to screw up the whole page because you did something wrong, or you want to move that location of that chart. Having those charts on those stickies means you can just move them around to your heart's content until you get that layout right. So that's typically what I will do. And then with my dashboards, I tend to follow the same kind of principles for layout. So this is stereotypical of a basic dashboard that you see on the screen. So but yeah, that's the approach I take.
Gotcha.
So Sarah, do you like make dashboards for a wide range of users and different industries, or are your users more heterogeneous, like in either like marketing or upper management, or all in real estate or all in finance? What does your range of experience look like?
Yeah, so I've done kind of like the whole spectrum. So I used to work in consulting. So you'd kind of go in and it would change it with every project you had. It would be a different industry, different audience. So it's different every time. But I think that for the most part, these principles apply, right? They boil down to like design principles. So it's irrelevant if you're designing something for a pharmaceutical company or if you're doing something for marketing. I think the principles will still apply regardless.
Yeah, I asked a question because, like, in a past life, I was a freelance photographer, and I would do different types of work. I would do like theater and concert, sports, portraits, and depending on the client, I would have a separate type of portfolio that I would show each one, and then use that to get a feel for what type of shots they're looking for. Have you ever used a portfolio approach where you say, well, here's a customer in marketing, or here's a customer in pharmaceuticals. I'm going to show them some past dashboards I've done for those type of customers and kind of get a feel for, you know, what gets a positive reaction to help.
Yeah. I have taken that approach before, both with dashboards I've created and also dashboards that I admire from Tableau Public. So if I see people put out dashboards that I think are really good, I have put them in front of clients before, to give them almost a sense of what's possible, particularly if it applies to their industry. Because I think if it applies to their industry or their department, they can resonate with it more. So perhaps if you're doing a dashboard on I don't know, talent acquisition. If you show someone what's possible with talent acquisition, they get pretty excited. And that's why I like the Tableau Exchange, because it has those examples on there that you can use. But I think the one caveat to that would be finance people, because finance people love to see the numbers. They typically, it's like, I don't care about the charts. I just want to see the numbers in the table. So for that audience, I typically take a slightly different approach in terms of what I would show them.
Okay. Pamela has a question about accessibility considerations. Her question is, are there obvious color choices that should be avoided? I think maybe to be sensitive to people with color blindness, or you talked a little bit about colors being confusing, having multiple meanings. Can you add anything to that about color choices?
Yeah, so I think the stereotypical kind of red, amber, green, or red, orange, green, whatever you want to call it, can be problematic, right? If we use the stereotypical reds and greens, like I call them like the Christmas colors, because they're the colors that come out that time of year. But those two colors together can be very hard to distinguish if you're a certain type of color blindness. So there are ways around that, because I know that those people tend to associate those colors with, green is good, red is bad, right? And it can be very hard for some people to move away from that concept. So if you are stuck where, the stakeholder or the client is demanding that we must show red and green, you can use slightly different shades of those colors to make them colorblind friendly, let's say. I can send you some resources. So it's just listing out slightly different hex codes. So you'll use the approach you'll take is typically a darker red and a lighter green. So you're still using those colors, but you're changing them in such a way to make them accessible. But another thing we need to think about is contrast. So that's something that's taken me by surprise the more I've looked into accessibility. So making sure that there's enough contrast between the colors on the mark, so let's say the bars, and the background color. Because sometimes we might use a very, very light colored bar, and it's very hard to distinguish that bar between the background. And then the other thing to think about, sorry, is like the placement of colors. So if you have one color next to another, so you have a stacked bar and there's nothing in between them, you've got one color and another color, you need to make sure there's enough contrast between those two colors as well. And that's very hard to do. And so one way to get around that is to add a white border. a white line between those different elements. So then you're comparing the contrast with the white and then not the other color next to it. But I've learned all these things the hard way, trying to design colorblind friendly color palettes and figuring out that, it's not as easy as you might think it would be.
Well, that's why we have you here, to piggyback on your learning, and not all of us repeat it the hard way. There's a question here from Ben. He asked that about the spark lines that are along the top, but lack reference marks or indicators of the time frame. Are you doing that specifically to avoid cluttering?
Yeah, so typically with spark lines, I try not to add that information. I think, yeah, I've turned it off for these ones. Sometimes I might add in tooltips that show that, but for the most part, I try and pull that information away. This is a very simplified design. Normally, I would say, we'll look. Well, it does say the time period at the top, so we're looking at the last 12 months. So those spark lines would go from, in this case, December to December. Sometimes I might label the final point, so maybe put a circle at the end, and then the label of that value. But then I'm showing that value as a band instead in this case. But yeah, typically I wouldn't include axes and labels on those.
Okay, I think we've reached the end of our questions, Chris. I'll turn it back to you.
Oh, that was great. Yes, no, Sarah, that was amazing. And I just wanted to everybody give Sarah a big round of applause, a virtual round of applause here, for taking the time today. I know it's late where you are, and you do have an early morning flight. So thank you again, and we hope you come back. We'd love to have you back again and present. So
Thank you.